The photographs landed on the dining table like grenades, and Jane watched her husband's face transform from the man who'd kissed her awake that morning into a stranger carved from ice. "Explain this." Reb's voice came out flat, dead in a way that made her stomach drop. He stood across from her with his arms crossed, his jaw working like he was chewing glass. Behind him, his mother Diane hovered near the doorway, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Jane's fingers trembled as she reached for the photos, her breath catching when she saw them. A woman in her vintage burgundy coat, the one Reb had given her last winter, entering a hotel. Another photo showed the same figure leaving hours later. The woman wore Jane's distinctive turquoise necklace, the custom piece he'd commissioned for their anniversary, but the face was turned away in every shot, hair obscuring the features. "This isn't me," Jane's voice cracked. "Reb, I swear to God, this isn't me. Don't." He held up his hand, his eyes burning with something between rage and devastation. "Don't insult me by lying right to my face." "I'm not lying." Jane stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "Look at these closer. That's not my body, not my walk, not... It's your coat, your necklace." Diane's voice slithered across the room, thick with false sympathy. "Sweetheart, the hotel staff confirmed it. The woman who checked in gave your name, signed the register. I saw it myself when I went to verify." "What?" Jane whirled toward her mother-in-law, fury rising through her panic. "Why would you go to a hotel to verify anything? Because I care about my son." Diane moved closer, her performance flawless. "When I heard rumors, whispers at the club about you being seen, I couldn't believe it. I thought perhaps it was mistaken identity, so I went to ask discreetly. The night manager remembered you, showed me the signature in the guest book, your credit card receipt." Jane felt the ground shifting beneath her. "I was at the Children's Literacy fundraiser that night. Call them. Call anyone who was there. The event coordinator, the caterers, the photographer who took pictures all evening. People can leave events early." Diane's words were poison wrapped in concern. "Slip away unnoticed." "I didn't slip away!" Jane grabbed Reb's arm, felt him flinch away from her touch. The rejection cut deeper than any knife. "The gala went until midnight. I was there the entire time. I gave the closing remarks, for God's sake. There are witnesses. There's proof." "There's proof right here." Reb tapped the photos, his voice hollow. "This is your coat. The one I gave you because you said the color reminded you of autumn leaves. This is your necklace, the one I had made because you said you'd never seen anything more beautiful." Someone could have taken them. Jane heard the desperation creeping into her voice, hated how it made her sound guilty. "Borrowed them. Stolen them. Reb, please." "The hotel is the Grand Harbor." Diane pulled out a printed reservation confirmation, laid it on the table with the photos. "Room reserved under your name. Paid with a card that matches your account number." The manager said the woman who checked in knew details about the reservation that only the person who booked it would know. Jane stared at the paper, her vision blurring. The Grand Harbor. She'd never booked a room there, never used her card for anything like this. But seeing it in print, seeing her name attached to evidence she couldn't immediately disprove, it looked damning even to her own eyes. "I didn't do this." Jane looked up at Reb, willing him to see her truth. "Someone set this up. Someone who had access to my things, my information. Someone who wanted what?" Reb's voice rose for the first time. "What possible reason would anyone have to frame you for something this specific, this elaborate?" Jane's eyes cut to Diane, who stood there with her perfect mask of concern. "Ask your mother." "Don't you dare." Diane's voice turned sharp. "I've tried to welcome you into this family, tried to overlook your background, your lack of... That's enough." Reb held up his hand, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the air, that Jane wasn't good enough, had never been good enough, and this was simply her true nature revealing itself. Reb. Jane moved around the table, tried to close the distance between them. "You know me. You know I would never betray you. We've been talking about starting a family. We've been happy. Why would I throw that away for... I don't know." His voice dropped to barely a whisper, and that was somehow worse than the anger. Maybe I don't know you as well as I thought. Maybe I never did. You do know me. Tears poured down Jane's face now, hot and desperate. You know my heart. You know how much I love you. You have to believe me over this. Over photographs that could be anyone, and paperwork that could be forged, and my mother's eyewitness account. Reb turned to Diane. You spoke to the hotel staff directly? I did. Diane nodded solemnly. The night manager, a young man, very professional. He remembered because apparently the woman, she paused delicately, met someone in the lobby. They went up together. He saw them because he had to help with the elevator, which was malfunctioning. The detail was perfect. Specific enough to sound true, vague enough to be unprovable. Jane saw the trap closing around her, saw Reb's face hardening with each word his mother spoke. There is no someone. Jane's voice broke completely. There's no affair. There's nothing but lies designed to destroy us. And you, she pointed at Diane, you're behind this. You've never wanted me in this family, never thought I was good enough, and now you've manufactured evidence to get rid of me. Those are serious accusations. Diane's voice turned ice cold. Slanderous even. I understand you're upset, but attacking me won't change the facts. The facts are that I'm innocent. Jane turned back to Reb, her voice raw with desperation. And if you can't believe that, if you can choose to trust photographs and hotel clerks and your mother over me, then we never had what I thought we did. Reb stood frozen, his face a battlefield of emotions. For a moment, one impossible, hopeful moment, Jane thought he might choose her, might say the evidence didn't matter, that he knew her heart, that they'd figure this out together. I loved you more than my own life. His words came out strangled. And you threw it away. I didn't throw away anything. Jane's legs threatened to give out. You're throwing me away. You're choosing to believe I'm capable of this instead of questioning evidence that should be questioned. Reb turned toward the stairs, his movements mechanical. I'm packing. I'll send someone for the rest. Don't do this. Jane followed him, her hands outstretched, like she could physically stop him from leaving. Don't walk away without even investigating, without giving me a chance to prove my innocence, without trusting me enough to... Trust. He spun on the stairs, and for the first time she saw tears on his face. You want to talk about trust? I trusted you with everything, my heart, my future, my belief that we were building something real, and you destroyed that. I didn't destroy anything. Jane's voice turned to a scream. Your mother did. She's standing right there watching us fall apart and she's enjoying it. Can't you see that? Reb looked past her to where Diane stood, and for just a second Jane saw doubt flicker across his face, but Diane was ready. I'll leave you two to talk privately. Her voice was soft, wounded. I never wanted to be the one to bring you this pain, Reb. I love you. I only want what's best for you. She gathered her purse, moved toward the door, then paused. Jane, if you truly care about my son, you'll let him go gracefully. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. After she left, Jane and Reb stood in silence. The photographs remained spread across the table, the evidence that would end their marriage. I can't look at you right now. Reb's voice was hollow. Every time I do, I see those photos. I see you with him. I see our marriage as a lie. It wasn't a lie. Jane sank onto the bottom step, her body giving up the fight her voice couldn't. It was real, it is real, and if you walk away now, you're letting her win. You're giving her exactly what she wants. Reb climbed the stairs without responding. Jane listened to drawers opening, closets being emptied, the sounds of their life together being dismantled. She wanted to follow him, to keep fighting, to refuse to let this happen, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. When he came back down with his bag, Jane stood. Please, just one more thing. Check my calendar. Check with the gala organizers. Verify that I was where I said I was. If you do that, if you confirm I'm telling the truth about that night, will you at least consider that maybe the rest is fabricated too? Reb paused with his hand on the door. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, Even if you were at the gala, you could have left, snuck away. People do that. But I didn't. I don't know what to believe anymore. He opened the door, stepped out into the evening. I'll have my lawyer contact you. The door closed with a soft click. Jane stood in the empty house, the photographs still on the table, evidence of a betrayal that never happened. She walked over, picked up each one, studied them with shaking hands. The woman in the photos was good, the right height, the right build, the right coloring, but the face was always turned away. The signature on the hotel register, Jane squinted at the photocopy, was close, but not quite right. Missing the little flourish on the J that she always added. Someone had orchestrated this carefully, stolen or borrowed her coat and necklace, found someone who could pass for her from a distance, paid off the right people to create a paper trail, all to destroy her marriage. And it had worked. Jane climbed the stairs to their bedroom, pulled on one of Reb's shirts, and crawled under the covers. That's when she felt it, something hard pressing against her hip. She reached under his pillow and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a note, dated 2 weeks ago, in Reb's handwriting. My love, I've been terrible at keeping secrets from you, so I'm hiding this where you'll never look. I've booked us a suite at the Grand Harbour Hotel for our anniversary. 3 days, just us, like our wedding night. Can't wait to see your face when I surprise you. Forever yours, R. The Grand Harbour Hotel. The same place in the photographs. The same place his mother claimed Jane had gone to betray him. Diane had known about the surprise, had somehow discovered his plans, and had built her entire scheme around destroying Jane, using the very place Reb had chosen to celebrate their love. Jane's hands shook so violently, the note fluttered to the floor. She grabbed her phone, called Reb. Voicemail, called again. Each time, his absence more damning than any photograph. She curled onto her side, his note pressed against her chest, and finally let herself shatter. Her sobs echoed through the empty house, raw and broken and utterly alone. Tomorrow she'd fight this. Tomorrow she'd find a way to prove her innocence. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to survive this nightmare. But tonight, she mourned the death of her marriage and the man who'd chosen doubt over trust, fear over love, and his mother's carefully constructed lies over his wife's desperate truth. Chapter 2. The Exile. The apartment smelled like old paint and someone else's cooking, but it was hers, and that mattered more than Jane had ever imagined it could. She stood in the doorway of the studio, taking in the peeling linoleum, the water-stained ceiling, the single window that overlooked a brick wall. Not exactly the marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows she'd left behind, but that house had become a mausoleum, every room echoing with accusations she couldn't fight, every surface contaminated by her mother-in-law's poison. 3 days after Reb left, Jane had packed her essentials into 2 suitcases and walked away from their life together. She'd used the emergency fund she'd secretly maintained, money Reb never knew about, tucked away during their marriage. Not because she'd planned to leave, but because her mother had taught her that a woman should always have an escape route. Smart girl, her mother had said, when Jane called to tell her what happened. Come home, let me take care of you. I can't. Jane had pressed the phone against her ear, standing in the kitchen where everything had fallen apart. If I come to you, I'll never prove I can survive this alone. Her mother's silence had been heavy with unspoken words. I told you his family was trouble. I warned you they'd never accept you, but she'd only said, call me when you're ready. That had been 2 weeks ago. Now Jane sat on the thin mattress that came with the furnished studio, her laptop open, scrolling through job listings. Her business degree, the one she'd earned before meeting Reb, before becoming the trophy wife attending charity lunches and gallery openings, might actually be worth something again. She applied to 17 positions that first night: marketing coordinator, junior account manager, administrative assistant, anything that would pay rent and give her somewhere to be besides this tiny room that smelled like defeat. The first interview came through within days. Jane wore her best suit, the navy one Reb had bought her for some corporate dinner she couldn't even remember now. She walked into the office building with her chin up, her resume polished, her story carefully rehearsed. The hiring manager's face had shifted the moment she introduced herself. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Jane Brown," he'd repeated slowly, glancing at his assistant. "I apologize, but we've actually filled this position. We should have updated the listing." The lie was obvious. Clumsy. Jane had seen 3 other candidates in the waiting room on her way out. She tried again. Different company, different interviewer. This time the woman had been blunter. "I'm sorry, but given the circumstances of your personal situation, we don't feel you'd be the right fit for our company culture." Circumstances. As if Jane's name hadn't been splashed across gossip columns when news of the separation leaked, as if Diane hadn't made sure every society page in the city knew her son was divorcing his unfaithful wife. By the 5th rejection, Jane stopped using her married name. She became Jane Mitchell again. Her maiden name, the identity she'd buried when she'd said "I do" to a man who couldn't trust her when it mattered most. The next interview, no one recognized her. The hiring manager asked about her experience gap, the years she'd spent as a wife instead of an employee. Jane had prepared for this question. "I managed household operations, coordinated events for charitable organizations, handled budgets and vendor relationships." She kept her voice steady, professional. The skills translate directly to project management and client relations. She got the job. Junior marketing associate at a mid-sized firm downtown. The salary was less than half what Reb spent on her car payment, but Jane had never felt more victorious. Her own money, her own desk, her own name on emails that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. Her co-workers were younger than her, fresh out of college with energy that bordered on manic. They went out for drinks after work, shared inside jokes, complained about student loans and dating apps. Jane kept her distance at first, afraid someone would recognize her, would Google her name and find the wreckage of her marriage splashed across tabloid websites. But weeks passed, and no one seemed to care who she'd been. They only saw who she was now. Competent, quiet, always first to volunteer for the difficult accounts. "You want the Harrison project?" Her supervisor had looked surprised when Jane raised her hand. "It's a nightmare. Client changes their mind hourly. Budget is impossible, timeline is worse. I'll take it." Jane had met her eyes without flinching. "I work well under pressure." She'd taken the project home, spread the files across her tiny kitchen table, worked until her eyes burned, and her coffee went cold. By morning, she had a proposal that addressed every pain point, a timeline that built in flexibility, a budget that actually made sense. Her supervisor had stared at the presentation. "How did you do this overnight?" "I just needed to focus." Jane hadn't mentioned that focusing was easier when you had no one to go home to, no life outside these files, nothing but work to fill the hours until exhaustion let you sleep without dreaming about the man who'd chosen his mother's lies over your truth. The Harrison account became her success story, then the Bennett account, then 3 more that no one else wanted to touch. Within months, her supervisor was sending complex projects directly to Jane's desk, trusting her with clients who demanded perfection. Jane moved out of the studio into a 1-bedroom apartment with actual sunlight. She bought furniture from second-hand stores, repainted the walls herself, hung art she'd picked up at street fairs. Every piece was chosen by her, for her, with no one else's opinion to consider. She started taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings. Something about working with clay, feeling its shape under her hands, centered her in a way nothing else did. The instructor was an older woman with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes, who never asked about Jane's life outside the studio. "You have good hands," she'd said, watching Jane work. "Patient. Most beginners try to force the clay. You listen to it." Jane had smiled, thinking about all the things she'd tried to force that had broken under pressure. Her marriage, Reb's trust, her mother-in-law's acceptance. Maybe listening would have saved her. Or maybe some things were doomed from the start. One evening after class, Jane stopped at the corner market for groceries. She was comparing pasta prices when her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. "Hello?" "Jane, dear." Diane's voice slithered through the speaker, syrupy sweet poison. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Jane's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "I thought you should know. The wedding's in 2 months, Reb and my niece Samantha. Your mother gave her blessing when I asked. Apparently, she agrees it's for the best." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Wedding. Samantha. Her mother's blessing. "I see." Jane's voice came out remarkably steady, considering her heart was trying to break through her ribs. "That was fast." "When you know, you know." Diane's laugh was light, victorious. "Samantha has been such a comfort to him, and she's perfect for our family. Her background, her breeding, her values, everything we'd hoped for." "Everything I wasn't, you mean?" Jane set down the pasta, her appetite gone. "I didn't say that, dear." Diane's voice dripped with false sympathy. "But since you mention it, well, this is what's best for everyone. You can move on properly now. Find someone more suited to your circumstances." Jane closed her eyes, breathed through the rage. "Tell him I hope she makes him happy." "Oh, I'm sure she will. She'd never betray him." "And tell him—" Jane paused, choosing her words with surgical precision. "Tell him I forgive him for not believing me, because soon he'll have to learn to forgive himself." She hung up before Diane could respond, stood in the middle of the market aisle, with her phone pressed against her chest, breathing carefully around the pain. Reb was getting married to Diane's niece, the woman his mother had probably been grooming as a replacement since the day Jane entered their lives, and her own mother had given her blessing. Another betrayal, another person who'd chosen to believe the lies over fighting for her truth. Jane paid for her groceries, walked home through the cooling evening, climbed the stairs to her apartment. Inside, she set the bags on her small kitchen counter, poured herself a glass of wine, and stood by the window looking out at the city lights. She didn't cry. She'd done enough crying. Instead, she felt something else settling into her bones, something hard and bright and unbreakable. Reb could marry whoever he wanted. Diane could win this battle. But Jane had already won the war that mattered. She'd survived, she'd rebuilt, she'd become someone who didn't need anyone's belief or approval to know her own worth. Let him marry the replacement bride. Let Diane have her perfect family portrait. Jane had something they'd never take from her again: herself. She raised her wine glass to her reflection in the darkened window. "To new beginnings," she whispered, "and to the life I'm building with my own 2 hands." Outside, the city hummed its indifferent song. Inside, Jane stood taller than she had in months, rooted in the truth of who she'd become, not despite what happened, but because of it. Chapter 3. The wedding day. Reb stood in his childhood bedroom, adjusting his tie for the second marriage he never wanted, and realized he couldn't remember the sound of Jane's laugh anymore. He'd been trying for days. Lying awake at night in the guest room his mother had prepared, staring at the ceiling, trying to recall that bright, uninhibited sound that used to greet him every morning. But there was only silence where her voice should be, as if his mind was erasing her, bit by bit, making room for the life his mother insisted he should want. "Almost ready, darling." Diane's voice floated through the door. "Samantha's arrived. She looks absolutely radiant." Reb didn't answer. He stared at his reflection. Expensive tuxedo, perfectly styled hair, face that looked like a stranger's. 6 months ago, he'd stood in a courthouse in jeans and a button-down, holding Jane's hands while they promised forever, with only Lucas and her best friend as witnesses. Jane had wanted simple, had said the marriage mattered, not the performance. Now, he was about to perform for 200 guests in a ceremony that felt more like a business merger than a wedding. The tie wouldn't cooperate. His fingers fumbled with the silk, making it worse. Reb yanked it off, started again, his breath coming shorter than it should. Panic attack. Some distant part of him recognized. He'd been having them for weeks now, waking up unable to breathe, his chest tight, his mind screaming that something was wrong. But what could be wrong? He'd done the right thing. Left the wife who betrayed him. Cut out the cancer before it spread. His mother had assured him this was healthy, necessary, the only way to move forward. So why did moving forward feel like drowning? "Let me help." His father appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. He'd been like that since Reb announced the engagement to Samantha, polite but distant, as if watching something he couldn't quite bring himself to stop. His father's hands were steady on the tie, fixing what Reb had mangled. "You remember your cousin's wedding? You were maybe 16. You told me you'd never have something so ostentatious. Said you'd want something real, something that meant more than the show." People change. Reb heard how hollow his voice sounded. Do they? His father finished the tie, stepped back. Or do they just get better at lying to themselves? Before Reb could respond, his mother swept in with a photographer. "We need family photos before the ceremony. Reb, darling, try to look happy. You're about to marry a wonderful woman." The morning became a blur of staged moments, Reb with his parents, Reb with his groomsmen, business associates mostly, since Lucas had made himself scarce after Reb announced the wedding. Reb alone, staring pensively out a window in what the photographer called contemplative groom shots. He felt like a puppet, going through motions while someone else pulled the strings. Samantha found him during a break, her wedding dress a confection of white silk and lace that probably cost more than Jane's entire wardrobe. She looked beautiful. Any man would be lucky to marry her. Reb felt nothing. "Hey." She touched his arm, her smile soft. "You okay? You seem a million miles away." "Fine. Just wedding nerves." The lie came automatically. "You don't have to do this, you know." Samantha's voice dropped. "If you're not ready, if you're still, I'm ready." Reb cut her off, unable to hear whatever she'd been about to say. "Let's just get through today." Hurt flashed across her face, but she covered it quickly. "Okay, I'll see you out there." After she left, Reb sank onto the edge of his bed. His childhood bed where he'd slept until college, dreaming about the life he'd build someday, the woman he'd love, the family he'd create. He'd found that woman, Jane, and he'd thrown her away. No, she'd betrayed him. The evidence was clear. The photographs, the hotel records, his mother's eyewitness account. Jane had chosen someone else, had destroyed their marriage with her lies, and but Jane's face when he'd confronted her, the genuine confusion, the desperate pleas to investigate, the way she'd looked at his mother like she could see something Reb was missing. Reb shook his head, trying to clear it. These doubts had been plaguing him for weeks. Late at night, he'd pull out the photos, study them. The woman was Jane, her coat, her necklace, her build. But the face was never visible, always turned away, always shadowed. Why would a woman having an affair be so careful to hide her face? Wouldn't she be less paranoid, not more, in the moment? And the signature on the hotel register, Reb had found a photocopy in his mother's folder. It was Jane's handwriting, mostly. But that little flourish she always added to her J, the one he used to tease her about. It was missing stop. Reb said it out loud, his voice sharp in the empty room. Stop making excuses for her. But they weren't excuses. They were questions, valid questions that he'd been too angry, too hurt, too manipulated to ask when it mattered. Last week Samantha had tried to kiss him. A real kiss, not the chaste pecks they'd exchanged in public. They'd been alone in his apartment, reviewing wedding plans, and she'd leaned in with clear intent. Reb had frozen, pulled away, made some excuse about wanting to wait until after the wedding. The truth? He couldn't imagine being intimate with anyone who wasn't Jane. Couldn't stomach the thought of another woman's hands on him, another woman's body against his. Even now, months after Jane had supposedly betrayed him, his body only responded to memories of her. Pathetic. Reb stood, paced to the window below. The garden was being transformed into a ceremony space. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people's cars, a string quartet warming up near the arbor. Everything his mother had wanted for his first wedding. Everything Jane had gently refused, preferring their simple courthouse ceremony. "I wanted to marry you, not perform for your family." Jane had said when his mother suggested a big wedding. "I want us to start our life together, not put on a show." And Reb had loved her for that, for seeing through the performance to what mattered underneath. So what was he doing now? Performing for 200 guests? Marrying a woman he didn't love because his mother approved of her background, her breeding, her willingness to be molded into the perfect daughter-in-law? A knock. Lucas burst through the door before Reb could respond, his face flushed, his shirt untucked. Despite the formal occasion, he held a manila folder like it was a live bomb. "We need to talk." Lucas's eyes were wild. "Right now, before you make the biggest mistake of your life." "I already made that." Reb heard the bitterness in his own voice. "When I married Jane." "No." Lucas kicked the door shut, twisted the lock. "You made it when you believed your mother's lies." The room tilted. "Lucas, what are you?" "I hired a private investigator on my own because I couldn't watch you do this without being sure." Lucas thrust the folder into Reb's hands. "Look at it, all of it, before you walk down those stairs." Reb's fingers went numb. "I don't want to see." "You need to see it." Lucas's voice cracked. "Please, Reb, I'm begging you, just look." Inside were photographs, different from the ones his mother had shown him. These showed the hotel, but from a different angle, a woman entering, wearing Jane's coat and necklace. But when she turned, the face was wrong. Not Jane. A hired actress, according to the investigator's notes, more papers. Bank records showing payments from Diane's personal account to this woman. $50,000, paid in cash, to wear specific clothing and check into a specific hotel at a specific time. Hotel employee interviews. The night manager admitting he'd been paid to create false check-in records, to forge Jane's signature, to tell anyone who asked that, yes, he remembered the woman, yes, she'd met someone, yes, they'd gone upstairs together. Credit card analysis. The charges to the Grand Harbor Hotel hadn't come from Jane's real account. They were fabricated, created by someone who had access to her financial information, someone who could make fake receipts that looked real enough to fool a grieving husband looking for reasons to believe his wife had betrayed him. And finally, the trail leading back. Through careful documentation, through bank transfers, through recorded phone calls where Diane instructed people exactly what to say, exactly how to perform their roles in destroying her son's marriage, all of it. Every piece of evidence that had convinced Reb his wife was unfaithful, manufactured, orchestrated, bought and paid for by his own mother. The actress is willing to testify. Lucas's voice seemed to come from very far away. The hotel employees will admit what they did. The investigator has documentation proving every single piece of evidence was fabricated. Reb couldn't breathe. The folder slipped from his hands, papers scattering across the floor like the wreckage of his entire world. Jane was innocent. His voice came out strangled. "She was innocent and I didn't believe her." "Your mother set her up." Lucas crouched beside him, picked up the scattered pages. "She found out about your anniversary surprise at the Grand Harbor, used that information to build the whole scheme. Hired someone to wear Jane's coat and necklace, check into the hotel the week before your planned trip, created evidence that would destroy your trust exactly when and where it would hurt most." Reb thought about Jane's face when he'd accused her, the genuine shock, the desperate explanations, the way she'd begged him to investigate, to check with the gala organizers, to trust her over the evidence, and he'd walked away. Had chosen photographs and fake signatures and his mother's lies over the woman who'd loved him with everything she had. "I have to—" Reb stood, nearly fell, caught himself on the dresser. "I have to find her, apologize, explain. I have to— First you have to stop this." Lucas gestured to the window where guests were arriving, taking their seats. "You can't marry Samantha, not like this." "I never wanted to marry Samantha." The admission tore out of Reb. "I've been going through the motions, trying to convince myself I could feel something, but every time I look at her, I think about Jane. Every time she touches me, I feel wrong. I can't eat, can't sleep, can't function like a normal human because I destroyed the only person who ever made me feel whole." "Then tell her." Lucas gripped his shoulders. Go down there right now and tell everyone this wedding isn't happening." Diane's voice floated up the stairs. "Reb, darling, we're starting in 15 minutes. Reb looked at the folder, at the evidence of his mother's betrayal, at proof that he'd failed Jane in every possible way. "She's going to deny it." His voice was hollow. "Probably," Lucas nodded. "But you'll know the truth. Jane will know you know. That has to count for something." Did it? Knowing the truth now, after he'd spent 6 months treating Jane like a betrayer, after he'd moved on, started a new relationship, planned a new wedding. "What if I can't find her?" Reb's voice broke. "What if she's moved on? What if she's—" "That's her choice to make." Lucas's voice was gentle. "But you owe her the truth. You owe her this." He gestured to the folder. "Evidence that she was right, that you were wrong, that she deserves better than what you gave her." Reb walked to his closet, pulled out his wallet. Inside was a photo, Jane laughing at something off camera, her face radiant, her eyes full of joy. He'd carried it every day, even after walking out, even after deciding to marry someone else, unable to fully let her go. "I love her." The words hurt. "I never stopped loving her." "I know." Lucas squeezed his shoulder. "So go fix this, however long it takes, whatever it costs. Go make this right." Reb took the stairs 2 at a time, Lucas following. The house was full of guests mingling, champagne flowing, soft music playing. His mother stood near the bottom of the stairs, speaking with the wedding planner, her face glowing with satisfaction. She looked up as Reb descended, her smile widening. "There's my handsome groom. Everyone's ready for— Tell them to leave." Reb's voice cut through the cheerful noise. Conversations died, heads turned. "Tell everyone to go home." Diane's smile faltered. "Sweetheart, what are you—" "I know what you did." Reb held up the folder. "I know about the actress, the bribed hotel staff, the forged signature, the fake credit card receipts, all of it." His mother's face went carefully blank. Around them, guests pressed closer, phones emerging from pockets, capturing every moment of the Brown family implosion. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Diane's voice was ice. "Reb, you're clearly having pre-wedding nerves. Let's discuss this privately." "No more private discussions." Reb moved past her toward the center of the room. "No more lies. No more manipulation. You destroyed my marriage because you couldn't stand that I'd chosen someone without your approval. That woman wasn't suitable for this family." Diane's composure cracked slightly. "I did what was necessary to protect you." "You didn't protect me." Reb's voice rose. "You destroyed the only person I ever loved. You manufactured evidence to make me think she'd betrayed me. You orchestrated everything perfectly because you knew my weaknesses, knew I'd believe physical proof over emotional truth, knew you could manipulate me into abandoning my wife." Samantha appeared from somewhere, her wedding dress rustling, her face confused and hurt. "Reb, what's happening?" "I'm sorry." He turned to her, seeing for the first time how young she looked, how uncertain. "You deserve better than being a pawn in someone else's game. I can't marry you. I don't love you. I love someone else, someone I failed completely, and I need to spend whatever time I have left trying to make that right." Samantha's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I knew. I think I always knew. I just hoped—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "Go find her, and don't come back until you've become someone who deserves her." Reb walked past his mother, past the stunned guests, past the elaborate decorations that represented everything wrong with his family. Lucas followed, car keys already in hand. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked as they hit the street. "To find Jane." Reb's voice was raw. "Wherever she is, however long it takes. I'm going to find her and drop to my knees and beg her to let me spend the rest of my life proving how sorry I am." Behind them, the wedding of the season collapsed into scandal ahead. Reb faced the far more daunting task of finding the woman he'd destroyed and somehow convincing her that he finally believed her truth, even if he no longer deserved her forgiveness. Chapter 4. The search begins. Jane's apartment was empty except for a note from the landlord saying she'd moved 2 weeks prior, and Reb felt something inside him crack clean through. He stood in the doorway of the studio, if you could even call it that, barely large enough for a bed and a hot plate, staring at the scuffed floors and peeling paint. This was where she'd lived after he'd thrown her out of their home. This cramped, dim box that probably cost half her paycheck. While he'd been living in their 4-bedroom house, she'd been here. The landlord said she paid up front for 6 months. Lucas read from his phone, pulling information from the property manager he'd charmed into sharing details. Moved out early, left the place cleaner than she found it. No forwarding address. Reb walked to the single window, looked out at the brick wall 2 feet away. No sunlight, no view, just shadows and the distant echo of other people's lives. He pressed his palm against the glass, trying to imagine Jane standing here, trying to picture what she'd felt looking out at nothing. We'll find her. Lucas's hand landed on his shoulder. She can't have gone far. But Jane had always been smarter than people gave her credit for. Her mother's house was the obvious choice. Reb drove there first, arriving just after dawn the day after the cancelled wedding. He'd barely slept, couldn't eat, kept seeing Jane's face when he'd accused her, kept hearing her voice. I'm begging you. Don't let her destroy us. And he'd walked away anyway. Jane's mother answered the door in a bathrobe, her face hardening the moment she saw him. You've got some nerve showing up here. Is she here? Reb tried to see past her into the house. Mrs. Mitchell, please, I know what my mother did. I know Jane was innocent. I just need to... She's not here. The older woman's voice could have frozen fire. And even if she was, you'd be the last person I'd let near her. I need to apologize, to explain. Explain what? Mrs. Mitchell's eyes flashed. That you believed lies over your wife. That you chose your mother's poison over the woman who loved you. That you threw Jane away like garbage and now you want her back because it's convenient. It's not like that. Reb's voice cracked. Please. Just tell her I'm looking for her. Tell her I know the truth now. Tell her... I'll tell her nothing. Mrs. Mitchell started to close the door. You made your choice. Now live with it. The door slammed, leaving Reb standing on the porch like a beggar refused entry. He tried calling Jane's phone. Disconnected. Her email bounced back. Her social media accounts had been deleted or blocked. She'd erased herself from every space where he might find her. Reb hired 3 private investigators. The first came back empty within a week. She's good at covering tracks. Changed her name back to Mitchell, works under it now. But the city's big, and she clearly doesn't want to be found. The second investigator had more luck, or thought he did. Found a Jane Mitchell working at a marketing firm downtown. But when I showed up to verify, the receptionist said she'd called in sick, didn't come back for 3 days. I think someone tipped her off. The third investigator was the most honest. Mr. Brown, she knows you're looking. Every time we get close, she moves, changes her routine. It's like she's always one step ahead. Either she's incredibly lucky or someone's helping her. Lucas. It had to be. Reb confronted his best friend over whiskey in his empty house. Are you telling her I'm coming? Reb kept his voice level, though his hands shook around his glass. Are you helping her hide from me? No. Lucas met his eyes. But I'm not helping you either. She deserves to decide when and if she wants to see you again. You don't get to force that. I just want to apologize. You want forgiveness. Lucas set down his drink. There's a difference. One is about her healing, the other is about yours. Reb had no response to that, because Lucas was right. He needed Jane's forgiveness more than oxygen, more than food, more than sleep. The guilt was eating him alive, consuming him from the inside like acid. He confronted his mother next. She'd barricaded herself in the family estate after the wedding disaster, refusing phone calls, ignoring messages. Reb used his key, the one he'd had since childhood, and found her in the sitting room, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. I want to understand. Reb stood in the doorway, Lucas's evidence folder under his arm. Why did you do it? Diane didn't look up from her teacup. I was protecting you. From what? A woman who loved me? A happy marriage? from a woman who wasn't suitable for this family. Diane's voice was cold, clipped. She came from nothing, had no connections, no breeding, no understanding of our world. She would have held you back, embarrassed you. Eventually, I simply accelerated the inevitable. She was my wife. Reb moved into the room, his anger a living thing. I chose her, I loved her, and you destroyed that because you didn't think she was good enough. I did what mothers do. Diane finally looked at him, her eyes hard. I protected my child from making a mistake that would haunt him forever. The only mistake haunting me is believing you. Reb dropped the folder on the coffee table. I want you to know something. Dad's divorcing you. He told me this morning, said he can't live with what you've done. And I'm never speaking to you again. Not at holidays, not at family events, not if you're dying and I'm the last person on earth. Diane's composure cracked. Reb, you can't mean... I mean every word. He headed for the door, then paused. I hope it was worth it. Your perfect family vision, because you've lost everything real in pursuit of an illusion. He left her sitting there, her teacup trembling in her hands. The evidence of her crimes spread across the table like a verdict, but cutting off his mother didn't bring Jane back, didn't undo the damage, didn't erase the look in her eyes when he'd refused to believe her. Days became weeks. Reb stopped sleeping more than a few hours, surviving on coffee and guilt. He'd show up at his office but couldn't focus. His business partners noticed, started taking over his accounts, having quiet conversations about his fitness to lead. He didn't care. None of it mattered without Jane. At night he'd drive through the city, looking for her face in crowds. Dark hair, her height, the way she moved. He'd slam on brakes, abandon his car, chase strangers who turned out to be no one he knew. He wrote letters he couldn't send. Apologies that piled up on his desk, each one inadequate, each one failing to capture the magnitude of his betrayal and his regret. You're destroying yourself, Lucas said one evening, finding Reb in his office at midnight, surrounded by crumpled drafts. She's moved on. You need to accept that. How? Reb looked up, his face gaunt. How do I accept that I ruined the best thing in my life? That I chose my mother's lies over Jane's truth? That somewhere out there she's living with the pain I caused, and I can't even say I'm sorry? You grieve. Lucas sat across from him. You learn to live with what you've done, and maybe, eventually, you become someone who would never make that mistake again. But Reb didn't want to grieve. He wanted to fix this. Wanted to find Jane and drop to his knees and beg until she believed how sorry he was, how wrong he'd been, how completely he'd failed her. Except Jane was gone, vanished into the city like smoke, and Reb was left with nothing but regret and the growing certainty that he deserved every sleepless night, every moment of guilt, every hour of not knowing if she was okay. He'd made his choice when it mattered. Now he had to live with the consequences. On day 30 of searching, Reb sat in his car outside Jane's old apartment building, the one she'd left weeks ago. He'd been there before, multiple times, hoping she might return for some forgotten belonging she never did. As night fell, Reb rested his forehead against the steering wheel and finally broke. The sobs came from somewhere deep, wrenching and ugly and raw. He cried for Jane, for what they'd had, for what he'd thrown away. He cried for the life they should have lived, the children they'd talked about having, the future he'd destroyed with his inability to trust her when trust was all she'd needed. When the tears finally stopped, Reb sat in silence, emptied out and hollow. Through the windshield he watched the city continue its indifferent rhythm, people walking dogs, hailing cabs, heading home to lives that hadn't fallen apart. His phone buzzed. Lucas. Any luck? No. Reb's voice was hoarse. She's really gone. I'm sorry, brother. Reb ended the call, started his car, drove home through streets that all looked the same. Inside his empty house, he poured a drink he wouldn't finish, stood by the window where Jane used to read in the morning light, and wondered if she'd ever forgive him, wondered if he'd ever forgive himself. The answer to both, he suspected, was no. Chapter 5. Her Rising. The promotion came with a corner office and a view of the river, and Jane celebrated by buying herself the first flowers she'd received in 8 months. She set the bouquet on her new desk, actual mahogany, not the particle board from her old cubicle, and turned slowly, taking in the space, floor-to-ceiling windows, bookshelves waiting to be filled, a door that closed, giving her privacy for the first time since she'd started at the firm. You earned this. Her supervisor, former supervisor, technically they were equals now, stood in the doorway with a bottle of champagne. The Hammond campaign was brilliant. Clients specifically requested you for their next launch. Jane accepted the bottle, reading the label. Expensive stuff, the kind Reb used to order at restaurants without looking at prices. She pushed the thought away, smiled. I just gave them what they asked for. You gave them what they didn't know they needed. That's the difference between good and great. Her colleague raised an imaginary glass. Welcome to senior management, Jane. Try not to let the long hours and impossible demands destroy your soul. After she left, Jane stood by the window, watching boats move along the river. Senior account manager, her name on the company website, a salary that let her actually save money instead of living paycheck to paycheck. She'd done this. Built this career from nothing, from a failed marriage and a tiny apartment and applications that got rejected because her soon-to-be ex-husband's family had poisoned her reputation. She'd clawed her way up through competence and long hours and saying yes when everyone else said no. That evening, her pottery instructor congratulated her with a hug that smelled like clay dust and turpentine. I knew you had it in you. That focus, you've got the discipline of someone who's learned to channel pain into creation. Jane's hands shaped the clay on her wheel, feeling it respond to pressure, to heat, to her vision of what it could become. Is that what I'm doing? Isn't it? The older woman sat beside her, starting her own piece. You came here broken. Now you're whole, different than before, but whole. Different was the right word. The woman Jane had been, Reb's wife, dependent on his income and his name and his belief in her, was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, self-sufficient in ways she'd never needed to be before. She'd started dating David a month ago. They'd met at a gallery opening. Jane had gone alone, refusing to let her lack of a +1 keep her from enjoying art. He'd been standing in front of the same painting, an abstract piece that looked like chaos but felt like order underneath. What do you see? He'd asked without preamble. A structure trying to break free of itself. Jane had tilted her head, studying the harsh lines cutting through softer colors. Or maybe breaking free was the structure all along. David had smiled, introduced himself, asked if she wanted to discuss it over coffee. Nice smile. Safe eyes. The kind of man who held doors and paid for dinner and texted to make sure she got home safely. They'd been seeing each other regularly since dinner twice a week, movies on Sundays. He'd met her pottery instructor, had sat through one of her classes watching her work, asking intelligent questions about technique and temperature. He's lovely, her instructor had said after David left. Very attentive. He is. Jane had focused on her clay, not mentioning the absence of electricity when David kissed her goodnight, the way she felt pleasant but not passionate when his hand found hers across restaurant tables. He was safe. That was the appeal. David would never accuse her of betrayal without proof, would never choose someone else's lies over her truth, would never look at her with the devastating mix of love and rage that Reb had shown when he'd walked out. But he also never made her feel like the world could end and restart with a single look, never made her laugh so hard her sides hurt. Never knew her well enough to finish her sentences or read her moods from across a room. You seem distracted lately, David mentioned over dinner at their usual Thursday spot. Everything okay at work? Fine. Great, actually. The promotion's official now. Jane smiled, meaning it. Just adjusting to the new responsibilities. We should celebrate. Maybe that bed and breakfast upstate you mentioned? David reached across the table, his thumbs stroking her knuckles. Could be nice. Get away for a weekend. Something in Jane's chest tightened. A weekend away meant sharing a room, sharing a bed, taking their relationship to a place she wasn't sure she wanted to go. Not because David wasn't attractive or kind, but because taking that step felt like closing a door on something she wasn't ready to lock away yet. "Let me check my schedule." Jane squeezed his hand, then withdrew to reach for her wine. "Work's chaotic right now." Work was always chaotic. That was the beauty of it. An excuse that was never questioned, never suspect. Her mother visited the following week, taking in Jane's new apartment with obvious approval. "You've done well for yourself, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Mom." Jane poured tea, setting out the good cups she'd bought specifically for these visits. "It's been good, finding my footing." "And this David?" Her mother's eyes were sharp. "He makes you happy?" Jane hesitated a beat too long. Her mother noticed. She always did. "He makes me feel safe." Jane settled on honesty. "That counts for something." "It does." Her mother sipped her tea. "But safety isn't the same as joy. You remember that." The words lingered after her mother left. Safety versus joy. Stability versus passion. The smart choice versus the one that set your soul on fire and left you in ashes when it burned out. Jane was in the middle of reviewing a campaign proposal when her phone buzzed, a text from a friend. "You'll never guess who I just saw." Below was a photo, blurry and taken from a distance. A conference lobby, crowds of people in business attire, and there, captured in profile, unmistakable, even half hidden behind other attendees. Lucas, Reb's best friend, his brother in everything but blood. The man who'd stood up at their wedding, who'd given a toast about soulmates and forever, who'd probably stood up at the cancelled wedding too. If Lucas was here, in her city, at a marketing conference. Jane's hands went cold. She scanned the conference attendee list on her laptop. There. 3 names down from Lucas's. Reb Brown, Brown Industries. He was here, in the same building, possibly the same floor. She should leave, grab her laptop, make an excuse, disappear into the city before any chance encounter could happen. That was the smart move, the safe move. But something in her, some stubborn piece that refused to run anymore, kept her seated. She'd built this career, earned her place at this conference. She wouldn't surrender her ground because her ex-husband happened to occupy the same space. The afternoon panel ended. Jane gathered her materials, prepared to navigate the networking reception where connections were made and careers were advanced. She stepped into the hallway, joining the flow of attendees heading toward the ballroom, and locked eyes with Lucas across 30 feet of crowded lobby. His face went through several emotions at once. Shock, recognition, something that might have been guilt. He took a half step toward her, mouth opening like he might call her name. Jane turned on her heel and walked the opposite direction, her heart pounding against her ribs. She didn't run, didn't panic, just moved with purpose through the crowd, found a side exit and disappeared into the cooling evening air. Outside, she leaned against the building, breathing carefully around the tightness in her chest. Seeing Lucas had been like ripping off a barely healed scab. All the memories flooding back. Reb's face when he accused her, the feeling of her world crumbling, the months of rebuilding herself piece by painful piece. Jane. She spun. But it wasn't Lucas standing there, just a colleague from her firm, smiling innocently. "Didn't realize you'd be here. Want to grab a drink at the hotel bar?" "Rain check." Jane forced her professional smile into place. "Early meeting tomorrow." She walked to her car, drove home through familiar streets, climbed the stairs to her apartment. Inside, she locked the door, set down her things, and stood in the center of her living room, feeling the weight of almost running into Reb. Because that's what seeing Lucas meant. Reb was close, in her city, in her space, and Jane couldn't decide if that made her want to run faster or finally stop running and face whatever came next. That night, David texted goodnight with his usual string of heart emojis. Jane replied with a single heart, then set her phone down and stood by her window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Reb was looking at the same sky, breathing the same air, maybe thinking about her the way she was suddenly, unwillingly, thinking about him. Jane pressed her forehead against the cool glass and made herself a promise. Whatever happened next, whoever found whom, she wouldn't be the woman who'd begged for belief and been denied. She'd be the woman who'd survived, who'd rebuilt, who'd become someone worth respecting, even if part of her still ached for the man who'd failed to trust her when trust was all she'd needed. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. When Reb walked into Jane's office building lobby, Lucas had finally cracked and given him her location. He looked like a man who'd forgotten how to sleep, and Jane felt her carefully built walls tremble. She was heading to a meeting, files under one arm, coffee in the other hand, mentally reviewing the presentation she'd spent all morning perfecting. The elevator doors opened, and there he stood, in her building, 10 feet away, staring at her like she was a ghost he'd conjured through sheer desperate willpower. Jane's first instinct was to turn around, walk away, pretend she hadn't seen him, but her feet wouldn't move, rooted to the polished lobby floor, while her heart tried to escape through her throat. Jane. Her name in his voice after all these months. Hoarse, wrecked, full of things she couldn't let herself hear. Please, I just need 5 minutes. Her assistant rushed over, positioning herself between Jane and Reb like a tiny aggressive shield. Ms. Mitchell, should I call security? It's fine, Amy. Jane heard her own voice from somewhere far away, remarkably steady considering the earthquake happening inside her chest. I'll handle this. She led Reb to a conference room off the main lobby. Glass walls, visible to everyone passing by. Safe, public. No room for the kind of emotional devastation that could happen behind closed doors. They sat across from each other at the polished table. Jane set down her files with deliberate care, her coffee placed precisely on a coaster. Small actions, controlled movements, anything to keep her hands from shaking. Reb looked terrible. Gaunt face, shadows under his eyes, his suit hanging looser than it should. The man who'd always been composed, confident, commanding, reduced to this hollow version of himself. Good. Some vicious part of her thought, let him suffer like I did. I know the truth. Reb's words tumbled out, rushed and desperate. About my mother, the photos, the forged signature. Lucas hired an investigator. The actress confessed. The hotel employee admitted he was bribed. I have proof of everything. Jane sat very still, her face carefully blank. Congratulations, you discovered what I told you from the beginning. Jane, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you, should have trusted you over the evidence, should have... But you didn't. Her voice came out surgical, precise. You chose to believe I'd betray you, that I'd throw away our marriage for a stranger, that I'd lie to your face while you accused me. I was wrong. Reb leaned forward, his hands gripping the table edge. I was completely, devastatingly wrong, and I've spent every day since trying to find you, trying to apologize, trying to what? Jane's control started fracturing. Make yourself feel better, ease your guilt, get forgiveness so you can sleep at night? No. Yes, I don't know. Reb's voice cracked. I just need you to know that I know I failed you, that I destroyed the best thing in my life because I couldn't trust you the way you deserved. Jane stood, walked to the glass wall, stared out at her colleagues passing by with their normal problems and intact lives. I spent 3 months in a studio apartment that barely qualified as housing, working jobs where people looked at me like I was contaminated because your mother made sure everyone thought I was a betrayer. She turned, met his eyes. Do you know what that does to someone? Being called a liar when you're telling the truth. Having the person you love most look at you with contempt. I can imagine. No. Jane cut him off. You can't. Because you were the one doing the looking. You were safe in your certainty, in your righteous anger. I was the one living with the consequences of your choice to believe lies. Reb stood, moved toward her. Jane held up her hand, stopping him. I blame myself. Did you know that? I replayed every moment, trying to figure out what I could have said differently, what evidence I could have provided, how I could have made you trust me. Her voice didn't shake, she wouldn't let it. I spent nights wondering what was wrong with me that my own husband chose to believe I was capable of something so cruel. Nothing was wrong with you. Tears tracked down Reb's face openly. Everything was wrong with me. My mother manipulated the situation perfectly because she knew my weaknesses, knew I'd believe physical evidence over emotional truth, knew I'd rather see betrayal than admit my own family could be that evil. And that's supposed to absolve you? Jane's laugh was bitter. Your mother was evil, so you're just a victim too. We're both casualties of her schemes, so we can forgive and move on. No. Reb shook his head. I'm not asking you to absolve me. I'm just asking you to know that I understand what I did, that I've cut off my mother completely, that I'd give anything, everything, to take back that moment when I chose not to believe you. Jane walked to the door, her hand on the handle. I've built a good life without you, a real life, where people value my work and respect my word and don't question whether I'm lying when I tell them truth. She looked back at him. You're not welcome in it. Jane, please. Security will escort you out now. Jane opened the door, signaled to the guard she'd asked Amy to call. Don't come back here, don't show up at my apartment, don't try to contact me again. Reb stood frozen as security approached. His eyes held such devastation that Jane almost felt sorry for him, but she'd learned the hard way that pity was dangerous. That softness could destroy you if you let it. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm sorry, Reb said as the guard took his elbow. However long it takes, whatever it costs, I failed you, and I'll never stop trying to make that right. That's your burden now. Jane held his gaze, let him see the woman she'd become, harder, colder, unbreakable. Not mine. The guards led him away, past gawking colleagues, past Amy, who watched with fierce protectiveness, past the professional life Jane had built from the ashes of her marriage. She watched him go, her face impassive, her posture straight. Only when the elevator doors closed on him did Jane allow herself to move. She walked back to the conference room, closed the door, and stood with her back against it, while her carefully maintained composure shattered. Her hands shook so violently she had to press them against her thighs. Her breath came in short gasps that didn't seem to provide enough oxygen. The room spun slightly, tilted on an axis that felt fundamentally wrong. She'd seen him, spoken to him, heard his apologies and his explanations and his desperate attempts to make her understand his regret, and none of it had fixed the wound he'd carved into her soul when he chose not to believe her. Amy knocked softly. Ms. Mitchell, your 2 o'clock is waiting. Jane forced herself upright, checked her reflection in the glass, smoothed her hair. The professional mask slipped back into place, hiding the chaos underneath. Tell them I'll be there in 2 minutes. She gathered her files, picked up her now cold coffee, walked out of the conference room like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just faced the man who'd destroyed her and sent him away, like her heart wasn't trying to claw its way out of her chest. The meeting was torture. Jane smiled at the right moments, answered questions, presented her proposal with confidence she didn't feel. Inside, she was screaming, but outside, she was perfect, poised, unaffected. That night, David called to ask about dinner. Jane begged off, claiming exhaustion. She sat in her apartment in the dark, phone in her lap, while the city hummed its indifferent song beyond her windows. Reb had found her, had stood in her space, had spoken her name, had tried to explain away the unforgivable. And Jane had sent him away because that's what strong women did. They protected themselves. They refused to let the people who'd hurt them close enough to do it again. So why did she feel like she'd lost something today instead of won? Jane didn't have an answer. She sat in her apartment until exhaustion finally dragged her towards sleep, wondering if Reb was somewhere in the same city, suffering the way she was suffering, broken by the same unbridgeable distance between them, and hating herself for caring whether he was or not. Chapter 7. The Campaign. The flowers arrived every morning for 40 days, each arrangement accompanied by handwritten notes that Jane read once before filing in a drawer. She told herself she'd throw away tomorrow, day one. I'm not asking for anything, just want you to know I'm thinking of you. Day 5. Donated to the Literacy Foundation in your name. Remember when you spent every Saturday reading to kids at the shelter? They still ask about you. Day 12. I sold the house, couldn't live in the place where I failed you so completely. Day 23. My father divorced my mother. I haven't spoken to her in months. You were right about her all along. Day 37. You taught me that love means believing someone even when the evidence suggests otherwise. I failed that lesson. I'm sorry, I never deserved the way you loved me. That last note broke something in Jane. She sat at her kitchen table, reading it over and over, tears streaming down her face. Because it was true. She had loved Reb with absolute conviction, had believed in their marriage with every cell in her body, had trusted him to do the same. And he'd chosen doubt instead. The notes weren't the only thing. Reb launched a campaign of quiet, persistent presence that never crossed into harassment, but never quite let Jane forget he existed. Donations to every charity she'd ever supported, always in her name. Substantial amounts that made board members call to thank her personally. Your generosity is extraordinary, Ms. Mitchell. The children's wing will be named in your honor. Jane had to explain that it wasn't her generosity, that her ex-husband was using philanthropy as an apology. The board members fell silent, uncomfortable with the messiness of personal drama invading their fundraising efforts. Then came the newspaper ad. Full page in the city's main paper, running for 3 consecutive days. No photo, just text. To Jane, I was wrong, I failed you when you needed me most. I believed lies over your truth, chose fear over trust, and destroyed the best thing in my life through my own weakness. You were innocent. I was blind. And I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover the magnitude of my failure. You owe me nothing. But the world should know, Jane Mitchell is a woman of integrity, honor, and strength. Everything that happened was my fault, not hers. I hope you find the happiness I failed to give you. Jane's phone exploded. Old friends calling, crying, apologizing for believing the gossip, acquaintances texting their support. Her boss summoning her to his office to ask if she needed time off to deal with this situation. I'm fine. Jane kept her voice level, professional. My personal life won't affect my work. But it did affect her. How could it not? Everywhere she went, people whispered, pointed, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, all of them making her private pain public entertainment. David noticed, of course. He'd been patient with her distance, hadn't pushed when she'd postponed their weekend away. But seeing Reb's public apology seemed to crystallize something for him. He's trying to win you back. David said it matter-of-factly over dinner at their usual spot. All the flowers, the donations, this newspaper thing, he's mounting a campaign. I know. Jane picked at her food, appetite gone. I'm not interested. Aren't you? David's eyes were sad, but knowing, because you keep all the notes. I saw the drawer last week when I was looking for coffee filters. You've saved every single one. Jane set down her fork. I shouldn't have. Maybe. David reached across the table, took her hand. Or maybe you're not as over him as you want to be. I am. Jane heard the lie even as she said it. He destroyed me, David, chose his mother's poison over my truth. That's not something you forgive. Isn't it? David squeezed her fingers gently. People make mistakes. Terrible ones sometimes. And sometimes those people spend the rest of their lives trying to make it right. Why are you defending him? Jane pulled her hand back, confused and a little angry. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side. David's voice was gentle, which is why I'm telling you the truth. You're not here with me. Not really. Part of you is still with him, still hurt by him, still somethinging about him. And that's okay. but it's not fair to either of us to pretend otherwise." Jane stared at her plate, unable to deny what he was saying, because he was right. She'd been performing this relationship, playing the role of a woman who'd moved on when really she was just existing in a state of careful numbness. "I'm sorry." Jane's voice came out small. "You deserve better than someone who's still broken." "You're not broken." David smiled sadly. "You're healing. There's a difference. But I think you need to finish healing before you can be with anyone, including me." They finished dinner in quiet companionship, both knowing this was an ending. Outside the restaurant, David kissed her forehead. "For what it's worth, I think you should talk to him. Not because he deserves it, but because you deserve to say whatever you need to say, without me standing in the way." Jane watched him walk away, feeling guilty and relieved in equal measure. Another good man exiting her life. Another casualty of her inability to fully let go of the past. That night she sat on her bedroom floor with the drawer of notes spread around her. 40 little pieces of paper, 40 apologies, 40 attempts to bridge the unbridgeable. One note she picked up again and again. The one about love, meaning belief in the face of contrary evidence. About failing that lesson. About never deserving how she'd loved him. Jane held a match to the corner, watched the paper catch fire. Then another note, another. She burned them all in her sink, watching the words turn to ash and smoke, purging her space of his presence, his words, his persistent attempts to earn forgiveness he didn't deserve. All except that last one. That one she folded carefully, tucked back into the drawer, and closed away where she wouldn't have to look at it. Tomorrow she'd throw it away too. Tomorrow she'd finish this purging and move forward cleanly, without the weight of Reb's regret anchoring her to a past that no longer existed tomorrow. But tonight she kept just that one note, just that one truth, just that one admission that he knew exactly how badly he'd failed her, and told herself it didn't mean anything, that she couldn't quite let it go. Chapter 8. Her decision. When David mentioned meeting his parents over dinner at their usual Thursday restaurant, Jane looked across the table and saw the future he was offering, safe, comfortable, half-lived, and felt something inside her break open with clarity. "They're coming to town next month." David smiled, hopeful and gentle. "I thought maybe we could all have brunch. Nothing formal, just meeting them, if you're ready." Meeting the parents. The relationship escalation that signaled serious intent. The step that said we're building towards something permanent. Jane looked at David's earnest face and felt a wave of guilt so strong it nearly drowned her. This man had been nothing but kind, patient with her emotional distance, understanding about her need for space, never pushing, never demanding, just there. Steady and stable, and exactly what she'd thought she needed after the chaos of her marriage. Except she'd been using him. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but using him nonetheless, using his kindness as a shield, his presence as proof that she'd moved on, his uncomplicated affection as a substitute for the complicated, devastating love she'd lost. And David deserved so much better than being someone's shield. "I can't meet your parents." Jane's voice came out quiet but firm. "David, I need to be honest with you about everything." His smile faded. He set down his fork carefully, his eyes already showing he knew what was coming. "Okay. You're a good man, a really good man." Jane folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "You've been patient and understanding, and you've never asked for more than I could give. But that's the problem. I can't give you what you deserve. Which is someone who lights up when you walk in the room." Jane forced herself to meet his eyes. Someone whose heart races when you touch them. Someone who's actually present in this relationship instead of performing it. David was quiet for a long moment. "You're still in love with him?" "No." Jane shook her head, then stopped. "I don't know. Maybe. But that's not the point. The point is, I'm not in love with you, and I've been pretending I could be. Or that maybe love would grow if I just gave it enough time. But that's not fair to you." When did you decide this? David's voice held no anger, just resignation. Or have you known all along? I've suspected. Jane's hands twisted in her lap. But seeing Reb at my office, having him show up and apologize and explain everything, it made me realize I've been hiding from my feelings, from my pain, from actually dealing with what happened, and you've been my hiding place. I knew. David reached for his water glass, took a careful sip. I told myself it didn't matter, that eventually you'd get over him and see me, really see me, but I was lying to myself as much as you were lying to yourself. I'm so sorry. Jane felt tears burning behind her eyes. You deserve someone who chooses you with their whole heart, not someone who's using you as a safety net while they figure out their mess. I deserve that. David nodded slowly. And so do you. You deserve to be with someone you're actually in love with, not just someone who won't hurt you. Maybe I don't get that. Jane's voice cracked. Maybe I had my chance and I lost it, and now I just get safe. That's bullshit. David's bluntness surprised her. You're one of the strongest people I know. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. You turned pain into power. You created a whole new life. That woman doesn't settle for safe. Jane looked at him through blurred vision. Why are you being so understanding? You should be angry. I wasted months of your time. You didn't waste anything. David smiled sadly. I knew what I was getting into. I chose to hope anyway. That's on me, not you. He paused, studying her face. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Jane opened her mouth, ready to say no, but the word wouldn't come, because she didn't know anymore. The certainty she'd felt when she'd sent Reb away from her office had been eroding slowly, note by note, day by day, and she was terrified of what that erosion meant. I don't know, she finally admitted. Part of me says what he did is unforgivable, but another part... She stopped, struggling for words. Another part remembers who he was before, remembers what we had, wonders if people really can change. Then you need to find out. David signaled for the check, not for him, for you, because until you face whatever you still feel, you're going to be stuck halfway between past and future. They walked to the parking lot in silence. At Jane's car, David pulled her into a hug. I hope he's worth all this. I hope he's spent every day since becoming someone who would never make that mistake again, and I hope you find whatever peace looks like for you. I hope you find someone amazing. Jane held on to him tightly. Someone who sees you first, loves you completely, and doesn't need to heal before she can appreciate you. She's out there. David stepped back, his eyes already distant. Take care of yourself, Jane. She watched him drive away, this good man she'd tried and failed to love. Then she sat in her car in the cooling evening, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. David was right. She'd been hiding, using him as proof that she'd moved on when really she'd just been avoiding the harder work of actually processing what happened, of facing the question she'd been running from since Reb walked out of their house. Could she forgive him? Should she forgive him? Did she even want to? Jane started her car, drove home through familiar streets, climbed the stairs to her apartment. Inside, she went straight to her bedroom, pulled open the drawer where she'd kept the last note. The one she hadn't burned, the one she couldn't quite let go. You taught me that love meant believing in someone even when the evidence said otherwise. I failed that lesson. I'm sorry, I never deserved the way you loved me. She read it 5 times, 10. Let the words sink in, let them settle into the cracks of her carefully maintained anger. He knew. Reb knew exactly what he'd done wrong, knew exactly what she'd needed from him and what he'd failed to give. And he was living with that knowledge every day, just like she was living with the pain of his failure. Maybe that didn't change anything. Maybe knowing you failed someone wasn't enough to earn forgiveness. Maybe the damage was too deep, too fundamental, too devastating to ever truly heal. Or maybe hurt people who acknowledged their hurt and tried to be better deserved a chance to prove they'd changed. Jane didn't know. She sat on her bedroom floor, the note clutched in her hands, and let herself feel everything she'd been suppressing. The anger, the betrayal, the grief for what they'd lost, but also the love that hadn't quite died, no matter how hard she'd tried to kill it. She'd loved Reb once with everything she had, and he'd failed her. Completely, devastatingly, in the worst way possible, but he'd also spent months trying to make it right, trying to prove his regret, trying to become someone worthy of her forgiveness. Was it enough? Could it ever be enough? Jane folded the note carefully, placed it back in the drawer, and made a decision. She would stop hiding, stop running, stop using her anger as armor. She would face whatever she still felt for Reb, and then, only then, would she decide if forgiveness was possible or if some wounds were too deep to ever fully heal. Tomorrow she'd start. Tomorrow she'd figure out what facing this actually meant. Tonight, she let herself grieve for David, for the safety she was giving up, for the easier path she was choosing to abandon in favor of the harder truth. And tomorrow, she'd figure out if she had the strength to risk her heart on the man who'd already broken it once. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Jane sat in her apartment, Lucas's words echoing in her head. He's been in the hospital for a week now, and the doctors say if he doesn't start fighting, his body's just going to shut down. And felt the old life reaching for her like a ghost. The call had come from an unknown number. Jane almost hadn't answered, trained by months of avoiding Reb's attempts at contact, but something made her pick up on the fourth ring. "Don't hang up." Lucas's voice was rough, exhausted in a way she'd never heard from him. "Please, Jane, just hear me out." She'd stayed silent, waiting. Reb's at Memorial. Has been for a week. He collapsed at work, complete physical breakdown from months of not eating right, not sleeping, working himself into the ground. Lucas took a shaky breath. "The doctors are saying it's acute stress cardiomyopathy. Basically, his heart muscle has weakened from prolonged stress and self-neglect. But Jane, the physical stuff isn't even the worst part. He's given up, won't engage with treatment, won't do the therapy they're recommending, won't fight to get better." Jane stood frozen in her kitchen, coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "That's not my responsibility." I know you don't owe him anything." Lucas's voice cracked slightly. "But I thought you should know, not because you need to save him, you don't. This is his mess to fix. But in case there's anything you want to say to him, any closure you need, now might be the time." "He's not dying." Jane kept her voice flat. "Not immediately, but he's destroying himself bit by bit, and he doesn't seem to care enough to stop." Lucas paused. "Look, forget I called. You've moved on. You've built a good life. You don't need this dragging you back. I just thought—" "Which hospital?" Jane heard herself ask. "Memorial. ICU, 4th floor. But Jane, you don't have to." She ended the call before he could finish, set down her phone like it was made of something toxic, stood in her apartment while morning light streamed through windows, illuminating the life she'd built without Reb. Acute stress, cardiomyopathy. Jane pulled out her laptop, researched it quickly. Also called broken heart syndrome, though the medical reality was more complex. Severe emotional stress causing the heart muscle to temporarily weaken, leading to symptoms similar to a heart attack. Usually reversible with treatment and lifestyle changes. Usually, but it required the patient actually wanting to recover, actually engaging with treatment instead of passively letting their body fail. Reb was in the hospital because he'd spent months systematically destroying himself, not eating properly, not sleeping, working until his body couldn't function anymore, and now he was lying in a hospital bed refusing to fight because the guilt was apparently more comfortable than the work of actually living with what he'd done. Selfish. Jane said it out loud, her voice sharp in the quiet apartment. Taking the coward's way out. Because that's what this was. Reb couldn't handle the consequences of his actions, so he was checking out, letting his body fail rather than doing the hard work of forgiving himself and becoming someone better. And Lucas expected her to what? Rush to his bedside, hold his hand, tell him it was okay so he'd have permission to heal. Jane made it through her shower thinking that. Through getting dressed, applying makeup, gathering her work materials. She made it all the way to her car, keys in hand, before the certainty started cracking. She'd spent a year rebuilding herself, becoming someone who didn't need Reb's belief or approval to know her own worth. She'd dated David, then chosen to end it honestly rather than use him as a shield. She'd built a career she was proud of, made a life that was fully hers. She didn't owe Reb her presence, didn't owe him comfort or forgiveness or even acknowledgement that he was suffering. His guilt, his self-destruction, his inability to live with his mistakes, none of that was her burden to carry. But if she didn't go, if she let him waste away in that hospital without facing whatever was still between them, would she regret it? Not because he deserved her presence, but because she deserved the closure of looking him in the eye one more time and choosing, definitively, whether he got to be part of her future or not. Jane started her car, drove toward the hospital, her jaw tight, her hands steady on the wheel. This wasn't about saving Reb. This was about her, about finishing something so she could move forward completely, without the weight of unfinished business anchoring her to a past that no longer served her. The hospital was exactly what she expected: sterile, quiet, full of that particular antiseptic smell that permeated all medical facilities. She gave her name at the ICU desk, saw the nurse's eyes widen slightly. "You're Jane." Not a question. Recognition and something that looked like relief. "I'll take you back." "How bad is he?" Jane kept her voice clinical, professional. "Physically, he's stable now. We've got him on medication to support his heart function, and the cardiomyopathy should reverse with proper treatment." The nurse led her through corridors past other rooms where families kept vigil. "But emotionally, he's not cooperating with therapy. Barely speaks to the doctors. It's like he's just waiting for his body to give him permission to give up." "That's his choice." "It is." The nurse stopped outside a room, her hand on the door. "But sometimes people need permission to fight, need someone to tell them their life is worth fighting for. I'm not here to give him that." Jane heard the hardness in her own voice. "I'm here for me, to finish this so I can move on." The nurse nodded, her expression neutral. "I'll give you privacy. Press the call button if you need anything." Inside, medical equipment beeped steady rhythms, IV stands, monitors displaying information about heart rate, blood oxygen, all the numbers that measured whether someone was living or just existing, and in the center of it all, Reb. He looked terrible. Gaunt face, hollow eyes, his body seeming smaller under the hospital blankets. Not actively dying, but not actively living either, just occupying space while machines monitored his decline. Jane stood in the doorway, unable to move closer. This was the man who'd accused her of betrayal without proof, who'd chosen his mother's lies over her truth, who'd walked out of their house and refused to answer her calls, refused to investigate, refused to believe in her innocence until it was far too late. And now he was here, destroying himself with guilt, and somehow that was supposed to be her problem to solve? No. Jane moved to the chair beside his bed and sat down with deliberate force. She wasn't here to solve anything. She was here to say what needed saying so she could leave with a clear conscience. "I don't know if you can hear me." Jane spoke to his sleeping form, her voice hard. "And I don't actually care. I'm saying this for me, not you." She leaned back, crossed her arms. "Lucas called. Told me you've been destroying yourself, working until you collapsed. Not eating, not sleeping. Basically committing slow suicide because you can't handle the guilt of what you did to me." Her voice turned sharp. "That's pathetic. You know that, right? Dying would be the easy way out. Living with what you did, that's the actual punishment you deserve." Reb didn't stir, just kept breathing slowly, his face peaceful in unconsciousness. "I was happy after you," Jane continued, her words precise. "I built a real life, got promoted. Made friends who valued me, started dating someone kind. I became someone whole and complete without needing your belief to validate my existence." She paused. "You don't get to take credit for that. You don't get to think your destruction somehow made me stronger. I made myself stronger, despite you, not because of you." Days passed. Jane went to work, came back to the hospital, brought her laptop, answered emails from the uncomfortable chair. Her assistant asked if she was okay, if she needed anything. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Jane kept her voice steady, professional. She talked to Reb's unconscious form about everything, her latest campaign that had won industry recognition, the pottery piece she'd finished that actually looked like what she'd intended. Said anything to fill the silence while she worked through whatever this was. David asked me to meet his parents. She spoke into the evening quiet of day 3. He was ready for something permanent, and I realized I couldn't give him that, because I was still too tangled up in anger at you. So I ended it. Not for you, for him, because he deserved someone whole, and I was apparently still broken from what you did to me. She stood, stretched, walked to the window. "Lucas says you're refusing treatment, refusing therapy, just lying here waiting for your body to quit." Jane's voice turned sharp. "That's a choice. You know, not a tragedy. You're choosing to give up rather than do the hard work of living with your mistakes. That's on you, not me." On day 4, the doctor came in to check vitals, nodding approvingly at the readings. "His numbers are improving. Whatever you're doing, it's helping." "I'm not doing anything." Jane's voice was flat. "He's the one who needs to choose to fight. I'm just here to finish some business so I can move on." The doctor looked at her for a long moment. Sometimes the business we think we're finishing is actually the business we're starting, just something to consider. After he left, Jane sat back down. "The doctors say you're improving physically. That's good, I guess. Means you can actually live with what you did instead of taking the coward's way out." More hours. More work. More one-sided conversations where Jane said everything she'd been holding back. "I loved you so much it nearly destroyed me when you didn't believe me." Her voice cracked slightly on day 5. "When you looked at me with contempt, when you chose your mother's lies over my truth. That broke something fundamental in me, made me question everything I thought I knew about us." She wiped her eyes angrily, "But I survived it. That's what I learned. I'm stronger than any love, even ours. I don't need you to be whole. I don't need your belief to know my worth. I don't need anything from you except maybe an acknowledgement that you failed me completely." On day 6, Reb's eyes moved beneath closed lids. Jane watched, waiting, but he slipped back into deeper sleep, leaving her suspended between hope and frustration. "If you're going to wake up, do it soon." She spoke to his sleeping form. "Because I'm not doing this indefinitely. I'm not sitting here waiting for you to decide your life is worth fighting for. That's your job, not mine." Day 7 dawned cold and clear. Jane arrived early, coffee in hand, prepared for another day of working while Reb slept. She was reviewing a contract when she heard the change in his breathing. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light. Confused at first, disoriented. Then his head turned, painfully slow, until his gaze found hers. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, all the history between them, all the damage, all the questions about whether some wounds were too deep to ever fully heal. "You're real." Reb's voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Unfortunately for you, yes." Jane set down her coffee, kept her face impassive. "Welcome back to the land of the living. Try to stay here this time." Tears slid down his face, soaking into the pillow. "Why are you here?" Jane studied him. The man who'd failed her. The man who'd spent months trying to prove his regret. The man who'd nearly given up entirely because living with his guilt was too hard. "Because I needed to decide something." She leaned forward. "I needed to look you in the eye and figure out if watching you destroy yourself would make me feel better." "Does it?" His question was barely a breath. "No." Jane's admission cost her. "Turns out I'm not vindictive enough to find satisfaction in your suffering, which is annoying, honestly. Would be easier if I could just hate you and move on." Reb closed his eyes, more tears escaping. "I'm sorry for everything, for not believing you, for choosing fear over trust, for failing you in every possible way. I know you're sorry." Jane kept her voice steady. "You've made that abundantly clear with the flowers and the donations and the public apology. I know you regret what happened. That's not the question." "What is the question?" "Whether you've actually changed." Jane held his gaze. "Whether you're someone who would never make that mistake again. Because sorry doesn't fix anything if the person saying it is still the same person who failed in the first place." They sat in silence while machines beeped and morning light filled the room. Finally, Jane spoke again. "I'm going to say something and I need you to really hear it." She leaned forward. "What your mother did was evil. What you did was fail me. Those are both true. You failed to trust me, failed to investigate, failed to choose me over convincing evidence. That's on you, not her. And I've spent a year learning to live with that failure." "Jane, I'm not finished." Her voice was firm. "I became someone who doesn't need you, someone who built her own life and her own worth without needing your validation. That woman isn't going anywhere. She's who I am now, and I like her a hell of a lot better than the woman who begged you to believe her while you walked away." Reb nodded, accepting this. "But," Jane took a breath, "I also realized something while sitting here watching you refuse to fight for your own life. I'm not done with you. I don't know if that means forgiveness or just closure, but there's something unfinished between us, and I need to figure out what that is before I can fully move forward." "What does that mean?" Reb's voice was tentative, hopeful. "It means maybe we try to figure out if there's a version of us that could exist. Not who we were, that's dead and buried, but new people. People who've both been broken and rebuilt. People who understand that trust isn't automatic, it's earned." She laid out her terms. Intensive therapy, both individual and couples. Separate homes. Complete independence and transparency. No rushing, no assumptions, no taking anything for granted. And most importantly, he had to want to live for himself, not for her. Had to do the work of forgiving himself and becoming someone better. "This isn't me saving you." Jane made that crystal clear. "This is me giving you a chance to prove you've changed, and if you haven't, if you can't, then we're done. Forever. No second chances after this." "I understand." Reb's voice was stronger now. "And Jane, thank you for not letting me take the coward's way out, for making me face this, for giving me any chance at all when I deserve none." "You're right, you don't deserve it." Jane stood. "But I deserve to choose my own future. And that includes deciding whether you get to be part of it. So prove you're worth the risk or don't. Either way, I'll survive." She gathered her things, prepared to leave. At the door, she paused. "One more thing. The doctors say you need to engage with treatment, stop lying here waiting to die, and actually fight for your recovery. Because if you can't even fight for yourself, you sure as hell can't fight for us." Then she left, walking out of the hospital into the morning sun, feeling lighter than she had in months. Not because she'd forgiven Reb. Not because they were getting back together. But because she'd faced the thing she'd been avoiding and made a choice, on her own terms, in her own time, for her own reasons. Whatever happened next was up to both of them. And Jane was finally okay with not knowing how it would end. Chapter 10. The Return. The ICU was quieter than Jane expected, just the steady rhythm of machines keeping Reb alive and the soft squeak of her shoes on linoleum as she walked toward the room where the man she'd once loved more than breathing lay dying from the weight of his own mistakes. She'd left Lucas in the cafeteria, needing these first moments alone to adjust, to decide if she was really doing this, to figure out what being here meant. Jane pushed open the door, stepped inside, pulled the chair closer to his bed. Still Reb didn't move. Still the machines beeped their mechanical song. Still she sat, watching him breathe, trying to reconcile this fragile man with the one who'd walked out of their house, convinced she'd betrayed him. "I don't know why I'm here." Jane spoke to his unconscious form, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't get to hear this. Don't get to know that I came, but I need to say it anyway." She leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, her eyes never leaving his face. "Lucas says you've been killing yourself slowly, deliberately. Working yourself to death because you can't live with what you did. She paused. That's selfish, you know. Dying would be the easy way out, living with it. That's the punishment you actually deserve. No response, just the steady beep of monitors. I was happy. Jane's voice hardened. After you, I built something good, got promoted, made real friends, became someone who didn't need anyone's approval to know her worth. She leaned forward. You don't get to take credit for that. You don't get to die thinking your destruction made me stronger. I made myself stronger, despite you, not because of you. Days passed. Jane went to work, came back, brought her laptop, answered emails from the uncomfortable chair. Her team thought she was visiting a sick relative, which was technically true if you counted ex-husbands as relatives. She talked to Reb's unconscious form about everything, her pottery class, the difficult client she'd won over the weather, anything to fill the silence. David asked me to meet his parents. She spoke into the dim evening of day 3. He was ready for something real, something permanent, and I couldn't do it because half my heart was still tangled up in hating you. Isn't that pathetic? I couldn't love a good man because I was too busy being angry at a man who destroyed me. She stood, stretched, walked to the window. So I broke up with him. For his sake, not yours, because he deserved someone whole, and I'm apparently permanently broken. You're not broken. Jane spun. Reb's eyes were still closed, but his fingers had twitched. Or had she imagined it? Reb? She moved closer, her heart pounding. Nothing. Just steady breathing and machines. Jane sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. She'd imagined it. Wanted it so badly, she'd conjured movement from stillness. On day 4, Reb's vitals improved slightly. The doctor explained it was a good sign, his body responding to treatment, his heart showing signs of recovery. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Sometimes patients respond to familiar voices. So Jane kept talking, about her apartment, her mother's visit, the latest office drama. She read him articles from the newspaper, including a scathing editorial about wealthy families who manipulated their children's lives. Your mother's name was in there. Implied, anyway. The society pages are having a field day with your cancelled wedding. Jane folded the paper. She's been cut from every board she served on, blacklisted from the charity circuit. Your father's divorce is public record now, and the settlement is, let's just say she'll survive but won't live the way she's accustomed to. On day 5, his fingers moved again. This time Jane was sure. She called the nurse, who checked vitals and nodded approvingly. He's fighting. That's good. Day 6, his eyes fluttered. Jane held her breath, waiting, but he slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving her suspended between hope and despair. On the 7th morning, just as dawn broke through the hospital window and Jane sat with her coffee reviewing a contract, Reb's eyes opened. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, disoriented. Then his head turned slowly, painfully, until his gaze found hers. You're real. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Unfortunately for you, yes. Jane set down her coffee, her heart hammering. Tears slid down his face, soaking into the pillow. Why are you here? Jane studied him. The man who'd failed her. The man who'd spent months trying to prove his regret. The man who'd nearly died from the weight of his own guilt. Because I needed to look you in the eye one more time. She leaned forward. I needed to decide if watching you die would make me feel better. Does it? His question was barely a breath. No. Jane's admission cost her. It doesn't. Reb closed his eyes, more tears escaping. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate. I know it changes nothing, but I'm sorry for every moment of pain I caused you, for not trusting you, for choosing fear over love, for failing you when you needed me most. I know you're sorry. Jane kept her voice steady. Lucas showed me everything. The investigation, the proof, the way you walked away from your own wedding when you discovered the truth. I know you've cut off your mother, that you've spent months searching for me. that you've tried every way you know to show me you regret what happened. But it's not enough. Reb opened his eyes, held her gaze. Is it? Nothing I do will ever be enough. I don't know yet. Jane surprised herself with the honesty. What your mother did was evil. What you did was human. You failed me completely, in the worst way possible. That's the truth we both have to carry now. Jane, let me finish. She held up her hand. I spent a year becoming someone who doesn't need you, who built her own career, her own life, her own identity separate from being your wife. That woman isn't going anywhere. She's who I am now. Reb nodded, accepting this, but I also spent a year remembering that I loved you. Past tense. Jane reached out slowly, gave him time to see her hand moving, then took his fingers in hers, first time touching him in over a year. His hand was warm, weak, trembling slightly. And maybe there's a version of us that could exist in the future, not who we were. We can't go back to that, but new people, building something different. I'll spend every day proving... No, Jane cut him off firmly. You'll spend every day being someone who would never make that mistake again. There's a difference. I don't need constant proof of your regret. I need consistent demonstration that you've fundamentally changed. She laid out her terms. Couples therapy, intensive, ongoing, no shortcuts. Separate homes while they figured out if this was even possible. Complete transparency about everything. Finances, schedules, conversations with family. She kept her career, her independence, her own space. And most importantly, no rushing, no assumptions, no taking anything for granted. This isn't getting back together. Jane made sure he understood. This is starting over from zero. We date. We rebuild trust one tiny piece at a time. And if at any point I decide it's not working, you accept that without argument. I agree to everything. Reb's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Whatever you need, however long it takes. Good. Jane sat back, but didn't let go of his hand. Because I need you to understand something. I don't deserve what you did to me. I didn't deserve to be doubted, accused, abandoned. That was your failure, not mine. I know. And I don't owe you forgiveness. This choice I'm making, to even consider rebuilding, it's not because you've earned it. It's because I'm choosing it for myself, because I deserve to decide my own future, and that includes deciding whether to give you another chance. Thank you. Reb's voice broke. I know I don't deserve it. I know I failed you. I just... Thank you for not letting me die without knowing you might... That we might... Might! Jane emphasized the word. No guarantees, Reb. This could fail. I could realize I can't trust you again. You could discover the guilt is too much to move past. We're not some fairy tale where love conquers all. I understand. They sat in silence, hands connected, while dawn turned to full morning outside the window. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications. The doctor visited, pleased with Reb's improvement, cautiously optimistic about recovery. Lucas appeared mid-morning, stopping short when he saw Jane and Reb both awake, hands clasped. Oh, should I? It's fine. Jane gestured him in. You can stop playing messenger service now. I'm here. I see that. Lucas's relief was visible. Does this mean... It means we're figuring it out. Jane kept her tone neutral, slowly, carefully, with no guarantees. Lucas nodded, his smile tentative. I'll take it. Over the following days, as Reb's strength returned, they talked real conversations, painful and honest. About Diane's manipulation and why Reb had been susceptible to it. About Jane's mother's warnings and why she'd ignored them, about trust and how it's built and how it's destroyed and whether it can be rebuilt from ashes. I think I always knew she was capable of cruelty. Reb admitted one afternoon. My mother. She'd been controlling my whole life, who I dated, what I studied, how I ran my business, but I told myself it came from love, that she wanted what was best for me. Maybe she did. Jane considered, in her twisted way. But wanting what's best and respecting your choices are different things. She couldn't stand that I'd chosen you without her input. Reb's voice was bitter, that I'd found someone who made me happy independent of her approval. So she destroyed it, Jane stated it flatly, and you let her. I let her. Reb met her eyes. That's on me. My mother pulled the trigger, but I loaded the gun by being someone who could be manipulated like that. Have you changed? Jane asked. Really? Because I can forgive a lot, but I can't forgive you doing this again. Can't survive being doubted a second time. I've changed. Reb's certainty was absolute. I'll prove it. Not with words, with actions. Consistent daily actions that show I'm someone different now. Weeks passed. Reb was released from the hospital with strict instructions for rest, therapy, cardiac monitoring. Jane visited his new apartment, smaller than his old house, furnished simply with none of the ostentation his mother would have demanded. I like it. Jane walked through the space. It suits you. The real you, not the version your family wanted you to be. They started therapy together. Brutal sessions where they excavated the ruins of their marriage, examined every failure, confronted every hurt. Jane cried in ways she hadn't let herself cry before Reb faced his patterns of choosing others' opinions over his own judgment. Your work is learning to trust yourself. Their therapist told Reb to believe in your own assessment of people and situations instead of defaulting to external validation. And yours, she told Jane, is learning to risk being vulnerable again, to accept that trust always involves the possibility of betrayal, and that's okay. That's what makes trust meaningful. Months passed. Jane kept her apartment, her career, her pottery class. Reb rebuilt his business relationships, started a foundation supporting wrongly accused spouses, slowly reconstructed his life. They had dinner twice a week, coffee on Saturday mornings. Long walks where they talked about everything and nothing. At her pottery showcase, Reb stood in the back, watching her glow as she explained her pieces to interested buyers. Afterward, he told her, I'm proud of who you've become. I didn't become this because of you. Jane's response was automatic. I know. Reb smiled, sad but genuine. You became this despite me. That's what makes you extraordinary. 1 year after the hospital, they had dinner at a restaurant neither had been to before. New place, new start. Real laughter happened, tentative but genuine. I never stopped loving you, Reb admitted as they walked to her car. Jane stopped, looked up at him. I know, but I did stop loving you. When you chose not to believe me, something in me died. I understand, but I chose to love you again. Jane continued, that's the difference. The first time was instinct. This time is choice, daily choice, conscious decision to risk my heart on you again. Is today a hard day? Reb asked quietly. Jane considered. Saw the man who'd destroyed her, and the man who'd spent a year proving he'd changed. Saw the past and the possible future, saw the scar tissue and the new growth. No, she smiled. Real, earned, honest. Today's a good day. They didn't go home together. That wasn't something Jane was ready for yet, maybe not for a long time, but they were okay with that. The greatest love stories aren't about never falling. They're about choosing to rebuild after everything falls apart, about the hard work of earning trust again, about becoming people worthy of the love they're asking for. Jane drove home through the city she'd rebuilt herself in. Tomorrow she'd see him again, and the day after that. Slowly, painfully slowly, they were learning if love could survive the death of trust and be born again into something different, something harder, something earned through daily choice and consistent action, something real, and maybe that was enough. Maybe the second version of their love story, scarred, rebuilt, fundamentally changed, would be stronger than the first, or maybe it wouldn't. Maybe they'd discover some wounds were too deep, some betrayals too fundamental, but for now, for today, they were trying, and sometimes trying is the bravest thing you can do. Jane parked, climbed the stairs to her apartment, stood by the window looking out at city lights. Somewhere out there, Reb was probably looking at the same sky, thinking about her. grateful for the chance she was giving him. And Jane was grateful too, not for what happened, but for who she'd become in the aftermath, for the strength she'd discovered, for the choice she'd made to risk love again on her own terms. She touched the glass, whispered to her reflection, "We'll see, we'll just see." Tomorrow would bring another chance to choose, another day to decide if rebuilding was worth the effort, another opportunity to write a new ending to their story, one built on truth, hard-won trust, and the courage to believe in love even after it's broken you. And maybe that was the greatest love story of all. The end.